February 19, 1945. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. Commander Takeshi Yamamoto stood before a detailed topographical map of Iwo Jima, his finger tracing the 8 square miles of volcanic rock that his superiors had declared absolutely impregnable. The American fleet was already visible on the horizon, and yet Yamamoto felt nothing but calm certainty. 21,000 Japanese defenders occupied the most sophisticated defensive network ever constructed in the Pacific. The Americans were about to learn what happened when soft, undisciplined troops met true warriors who had spent 16 months transforming an island into a fortress. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. They will break themselves against our defenses like waves against stone, declared General Tadamaki Kurabayashi during the final briefing, his voice carrying the absolute confidence of a man who had orchestrated every detail of the island's defense. American Marines have no experience fighting against positions like these. They rely on naval bombardment and air superiority because they lack the discipline for close combat. When they reach our kill zones, their weakness will be exposed. Yamamoto had no reason to doubt this assessment. Japanese intelligence had been tracking American Marine operations since Guadalcanal, and the patterns seemed clear. Americans preferred overwhelming firepower to tactical skill. They advanced slowly, cautiously, unwilling to accept the casualties that decisive victory required. Their reluctance to embrace sacrifice made them predictable and, ultimately, defeatable. What Commander Yamamoto could not know, what 3 years of successful defensive operations had made impossible for him to comprehend, was that American Marines had been studying Japanese defensive tactics with the same intensity that Japanese engineers had devoted to fortification. Every battle from Tarawa to Peleliu had been dissected, analyzed, and incorporated into new doctrine that would transform amphibious warfare forever. The mathematical precision of American adaptation was about to shatter everything Japanese officers believed about Marine capabilities, tactical flexibility, and the evolution of modern combat. Japanese confidence in February 1945 was not blind optimism. It was built on concrete achievements that had bloodied American forces across the Pacific. At Tarawa, Marines had suffered devastating casualties attempting frontal assaults against prepared positions. At Peleliu, Japanese defenders had inflicted nearly 10,000 casualties while holding out for 2 months. The lesson seemed obvious. Properly fortified Japanese positions were nearly invincible against American assault tactics. Commander Yamamoto had personally observed the Peleliu battle reports with professional satisfaction. American Marines had demonstrated predictable patterns that Japanese defenders could exploit. They relied heavily on preliminary bombardment that rarely destroyed deep fortifications. They advanced in waves that created concentrated targets for Japanese artillery. They lacked the flexibility to adapt when initial tactics failed. Most critically, they seemed psychologically unprepared for the sustained casualties that defeating Japanese defenders required. The mathematical equation seemed simple. Japanese defenders in prepared positions could inflict casualty ratios of 5-to-1 or higher against American assault forces. Given sufficient fortification and adequate supplies, a determined Japanese garrison could hold indefinitely or exact such terrible costs that American public opinion would force negotiation rather than continued offensive operations. Iwo Jima represented the ultimate expression of this defensive philosophy. General Kurabayashi had abandoned the traditional doctrine of meeting invaders at the beach in favor of defense in depth. The island's volcanic terrain had been transformed into a subterranean fortress with 11 miles of tunnels connecting hundreds of fortified positions. Every cave had been reinforced. Every hill had been honeycombed with firing positions that provided overlapping fields of fire. Artillery pieces were positioned in caves that protected them from naval bombardment while allowing them to target the landing beaches with devastating precision. The defensive preparations had taken 16 months and represented Japanese military engineering at its finest. Concrete bunkers 3 feet thick could withstand direct hits from naval guns. Tunnels allowed defenders to move between positions without exposure to American fire. Pre-registered artillery coordinates ensured that every square meter of the landing beaches could be saturated with fire on demand. Supply caches deep underground guaranteed that defenders could sustain operations even if surface positions were overrun. Japanese officers studying the defensive network concluded that American Marines faced an impossible tactical problem. They could not bypass Iwo Jima because its airfields threatened American bombing operations against Japan. They could not reduce the fortifications with naval bombardment because most positions were too deep or too well protected. They would be forced to assault prepared positions where Japanese defenders held every advantage. Lieutenant Colonel Hideaki Nakamura, commanding the northern sector defenses, had personally briefed his officers on what to expect when the Americans landed. The Marines will follow their standard doctrine. Heavy naval bombardment followed by waves of assault troops attempting to establish beachheads. Our positions are designed to survive bombardment and then emerge to catch assault waves in crossfire. Their casualties will be catastrophic within the first hour. By nightfall, they will be trapped on the beaches with nowhere to advance and no ability to evacuate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The second day will bring either retreat or annihilation. This assessment reflected Japanese understanding of American tactical limitations. Marines had demonstrated consistent inability to adapt quickly to unexpected defensive configurations. Their command structure was too rigid to allow rapid tactical innovation. Their reliance on firepower superiority made them vulnerable when facing enemies they could not see or effectively target. Most importantly, their cultural aversion to casualties would break their will to continue once losses reached unacceptable levels. But what Japanese intelligence had failed to recognize was the systematic transformation of Marine Corps doctrine occurring between each Pacific operation. Every failure was studied obsessively. Every successful Japanese tactic was analyzed and countered. American military culture embraced adaptation in ways that Japanese military tradition, with its emphasis on predetermined plans and unwavering execution, could not comprehend. At Marine Corps Headquarters in Hawaii, General Holland Smith had assembled tactical innovation teams specifically tasked with solving the problem of assaulting fortified positions. These teams included combat veterans, engineers, artillery specialists, and naval gunfire coordinators who spent months analyzing battle reports and developing new approaches. The innovations they developed represented revolutionary changes in amphibious assault doctrine. Instead of relying solely on naval bombardment, Marines would employ specialized weapons designed specifically for bunker reduction. Flamethrower teams would target cave positions that conventional weapons could not destroy. Demolition experts would use shaped charges to collapse tunnel entrances. Tank infantry coordination would provide mobile firepower that could respond immediately to emerging threats. Most critically, Marines would employ flexible small unit tactics that allowed squads to identify and exploit weaknesses in defensive positions without waiting for orders from higher command. The training regimen reflected this new doctrine. Every Marine infantry squad drilled endlessly on bunker assault techniques. Flamethrower operators practiced approaching fortified positions under covering fire. Tank crews coordinated with infantry units to develop mutual support protocols. Naval gunfire observers embedded with assault companies to provide immediate fire support against targets that emerged during battle. The preparation was meticulous, intensive, and focused on capabilities that Japanese defenders had never encountered. Commander Yamamoto would have dismissed these preparations as irrelevant if Japanese intelligence had detected them. Japanese military doctrine emphasized that individual soldier courage and willingness to die mattered more than tactical innovation or specialized equipment. Americans might develop clever weapons, but they lacked the spiritual strength to employ them effectively against defenders willing to fight to the death. The Japanese assessment rested on fundamental misunderstanding of American military culture. While Japanese forces emphasized spiritual unity and acceptance of death as the path to victory, American forces emphasized problem-solving, adaptation, and systematic application of superior resources. Neither approach was inherently superior, but they reflected fundamentally different assumptions about how wars were won. February 19 began with the naval bombardment that Japanese defenders had anticipated and prepared to survive. For 3 days, American battleships, cruisers, and destroyers had pounded Iwo Jima with the heaviest pre-invasion barrage in Pacific War history. Commander Yamamoto had monitored the bombardment from his command post deep beneath Mount Suribachi, confident that the fortifications would protect his forces until the Marines landed and exposed themselves to counterfire. The first wave of Marines hit the beaches at 9 in the morning under conditions that seemed to confirm Japanese tactical predictions. The volcanic sand absorbed their momentum, slowing the advance to a crawl. The beach gradients channeled assault forces into predetermined kill zones. Japanese artillery observers had perfect visibility of the landing areas from elevated positions that naval bombardment had failed to neutralize. For 15 minutes, it appeared that Japanese defensive doctrine would produce the catastrophic American casualties that commanders had predicted. Marines struggled through the sand while Japanese artillery began finding range. Machine gun positions emerged from caves and bunkers to rake the beaches with interlocking fire. The first wave took significant casualties and seemed to stall exactly as Japanese planning had anticipated. Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura watched from his observation post with grim satisfaction. The Americans are behaving exactly as predicted. They are bunching up on the beaches, creating concentrated targets for our artillery. Their advance has stalled. Within another 30 minutes, we will have inflicted sufficient casualties to break their assault momentum. They will be forced to withdraw or face annihilation. But what Nakamura was witnessing was not the beginning of American defeat. It was the last time Japanese defensive doctrine would function as designed against Marine Corps assault tactics. Within minutes, the systematic innovations developed over 3 years of Pacific combat began demonstrating their devastating effectiveness. The first shock came when Marine tank infantry teams bypassed beach obstacles and began advancing inland with coordination that Japanese observers had never witnessed in previous operations. Sherman tanks equipped with bulldozer blades carved paths through the volcanic sand, creating routes that allowed infantry to advance under armored protection. Tank cannons targeted specific bunkers with direct fire while infantry squads maneuvered to flank positions that revealed themselves by firing. They are using tanks in coordination with infantry squads, reported Captain Kenji Suzuki from a forward observation post, his voice carrying surprise rather than concern. This is different from their previous operations where tanks remained separate from infantry formations. They appear to have developed new tactical integration. The tactical integration was only beginning to reveal itself. Within the first hour, Marine combat engineers began employing weapons and techniques that Japanese defenders had never encountered. Flamethrower teams approached cave positions under covering fire from rifle squads and then delivered bursts of flame that penetrated deep into tunnel openings. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Japanese defenders who had felt secure in reinforced positions suddenly faced weapons that turned their fortifications into death traps. Demolition teams followed the flamethrowers, using satchel charges and shaped explosives to collapse cave entrances and seal tunnel networks. Positions that Japanese engineers had spent months creating were neutralized within minutes. Defenders who survived the initial assault found themselves trapped underground with no ability to observe American movements or coordinate counterfire. The second revelation came when American naval gunfire began demonstrating accuracy and responsiveness that Japanese tactical doctrine insisted was impossible. Forward observers embedded with assault companies called in fire missions against specific targets with precision that destroyed fortified positions naval bombardment had previously missed. Japanese artillery batteries that revealed their locations by firing found themselves targeted within minutes by naval shells that bracketed their positions with devastating effect. Our artillery positions are being suppressed by naval gunfire, Nakamura reported to General Kurabayashi with growing concern. The Americans have forward observers who can direct fire against individual bunkers. This level of coordination between ground forces and naval support exceeds anything we encountered in previous battles. The naval gunfire coordination represented years of training and doctrinal development that Japanese intelligence had never detected. Every Marine rifle company included trained observers who could communicate directly with offshore warships. radio equipment had been miniaturized and ruggedized to function in combat conditions. Targeting protocols had been refined to allow rapid engagement of emerging threats. The system transformed naval guns from area bombardment weapons into precision fire support that could respond immediately to tactical developments. By noon, Japanese defenders were experiencing a third shock that challenged their fundamental assumptions about American combat capabilities. Marine infantry squads were demonstrating small unit initiative and tactical flexibility that Japanese doctrine insisted undisciplined American troops could not achieve. Instead of advancing in predictable waves, squads were identifying weak points in defensive positions and exploiting them without waiting for orders from higher command. Sergeant James Mitchell led his squad through a ravine that Japanese planners had dismissed as impassable terrain. His Marines used the broken ground for concealment, advancing in short rushes while covering each other's movement. When they encountered a bunker position, Mitchell didn't wait for tank support or orders from his platoon commander. His squad maneuvered to flank the position while a bar gunner suppressed the firing ports. 2 Marines approached from the blind side and dropped grenades through the ventilation shaft, neutralizing the position in less than 3 minutes. Similar actions were occurring across the battlefield as Marine squads adapted to terrain and defensive configurations with speed that Japanese defenders found incomprehensible. "The Americans are not following predictable assault patterns," reported Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka from a bunker complex in the Central Highlands. "Individual squads are making independent tactical decisions based on local conditions. This level of initiative should not be possible in their command structure." The tactical initiative reflected fundamental differences in military culture that Japanese officers had consistently misunderstood. While Japanese doctrine emphasized executing predetermined plans regardless of changing conditions, American doctrine encouraged junior leaders to identify and exploit opportunities as they emerged. Marine squad leaders had authority to make tactical decisions that would have required field-grade officer approval in Japanese forces. This distributed decision-making created tactical tempo that overwhelmed defensive positions designed to counter predictable assault patterns. The fourth shock emerged as daylight began fading and Japanese commanders expected American forces to consolidate beachhead positions and prepare for nighttime defense. Instead, Marines continued pressing inland with aggressive night operations that violated Japanese assumptions about American unwillingness to fight in darkness. "They are maintaining offensive operations after dark," Yamamoto reported with disbelief. "American forces historically avoid night combat because they lack the discipline and unit cohesion it requires. Yet their advance has not slowed with nightfall. They are using illumination rounds and coordinated fire support to maintain pressure against our positions." The night operations reflected another systematic innovation in Marine doctrine. Specialized training had prepared units for night combat using techniques that preserved offensive momentum while managing the increased risks of darkness. Illumination rounds fired by mortars and artillery provided periodic visibility of defensive positions. Radio communication allowed squads to coordinate movements without verbal orders that might reveal locations. Most critically, Marines had overcome the psychological reluctance to advance into unknown terrain in darkness, pressing attacks that kept Japanese defenders off balance and unable to reinforce threatened positions. By the end of the first day, Japanese defensive doctrine had encountered a tactical revolution it was unprepared to counter. American Marines had landed 30,000 troops on an island Japanese commanders had declared impregnable. Instead of the catastrophic casualties that were supposed to break American assault momentum, Marines had penetrated inland and begun systematically reducing fortified positions using weapons and tactics that Japanese defenders could not effectively counter. Japanese defenders had fortified Suribachi with the expectation that its height and commanding position would make it impossible to assault without prohibitive casualties. Marine tactics shattered this assumption through systematic application of combined arms coordination that Japanese doctrine insisted was beyond American capability. Yamamoto watched through binoculars as Marines raised the American flag on Suribachi's summit and felt the weight of strategic failure settling over Japanese defensive planning. "We calculated that Suribachi would require at least 2 weeks to capture, assuming Americans were willing to accept massive casualties. They took it in 4 days using tactics we never anticipated. The flamethrowers, the demolition charges, the tank infantry coordination, all of it represents doctrinal evolution that our intelligence failed to detect or predict. The fall of Suribachi marked more than tactical defeat. It represented the collapse of Japanese confidence that defensive positions could reliably defeat American assault forces. If the most heavily fortified single position on the island could fall in 4 days, what did that suggest about the survivability of the remaining defensive network? Japanese officers who had expressed certainty about American weakness now confronted evidence that they had been fighting yesterday's Marines while today's Marines had evolved into something far more formidable. The third day brought revelations about American close air support capabilities that Japanese air defense doctrine had never adequately addressed. Marine Corsair fighters began providing direct support to ground forces with accuracy that turned Japanese strongpoints into death traps. Forward air controllers embedded with assault companies directed strikes against bunkers, cave positions, and troop concentrations with precision that exceeded anything Japanese forces had experienced. They are using aircraft like flying artillery, reported Major Ichiro Watanabe from the Central Highlands defensive sector. Pilots are hitting individual bunkers with rockets and bombs delivered from low altitude. Our anti-aircraft positions cannot engage effectively because the aircraft approach at speeds and angles our guns were not designed to counter. This represents integration between ground and air forces at a level we considered beyond American organizational capability. The air support integration reflected years of doctrinal development that Japanese intelligence had dismissed as impossible within American military culture. Marine aviators trained specifically to support ground operations rather than pursuing independent air superiority missions. Radio communication between ground controllers and pilots allowed real-time targeting adjustments. Weapons had been developed specifically for close air support missions. The entire system represented institutional commitment to combined arms warfare that Japanese military tradition, with its emphasis on service independence and inter-service rivalry, had never achieved. The psychological impact of airstrikes was devastating beyond their physical destruction. Japanese defenders who felt secure in underground positions found that bunker entrances could be collapsed by precisely delivered bombs. Artillery positions that revealed themselves by firing were attacked within minutes by aircraft that seemed to appear from nowhere. The constant threat from above created stress that degraded defensive effectiveness even when strikes did not directly hit positions. February 21 brought the fourth major shock to Japanese defensive confidence. American forces began employing specialized weapons that seemed designed specifically to counter every defensive technique Japanese engineers had developed. Satchel charges destroyed reinforced concrete that should have been impervious to portable explosives. White phosphorus grenades forced defenders from caves where conventional grenades had been ineffective. Flame tanks pumped burning fuel into tunnel networks that connected multiple defensive positions, killing defenders who thought themselves safe underground. Sergeant Takeshi Ito survived one such flame attack and reported experiences that revealed how completely American innovation had negated Japanese defensive advantages. We were positioned in a cave complex that intelligence assured us could withstand any assault. The entrance was too narrow for tanks, the walls too thick for artillery to penetrate. We felt completely secure until Marines began pumping flaming liquid into the tunnel system. The fire consumed oxygen and filled chambers with smoke and heat. Men who survived the flames suffocated in the smoke. Those who tried to escape were shot as they emerged. Within minutes, a position that took months to prepare was completely neutralized. The specialized weapons represented systematic American effort to develop solutions for every defensive challenge Japanese forces had presented. Each weapon had been designed, tested, and issued to units with specific training in its employment. The institutional learning cycle that produced these innovations was operating at speeds Japanese military bureaucracy could not match. By the time Japanese intelligence identified a new American weapon, improved versions were already being deployed. The fifth day witnessed collapse of Japanese artillery effectiveness as American counter-battery fire destroyed gun positions faster than crews could relocate them. Japanese artillery doctrine emphasized pre-registered fire missions that allowed guns to deliver accurate fire from protected positions. American counter-battery radar and aerial observation identified firing positions within seconds of guns revealing themselves. Naval gunfire and artillery strikes followed within minutes, destroying positions before crews could displace. "Our artillery is being systematically eliminated," Nakamura reported during the evening command conference. "Guns that fire more than 3 missions from the same position are located and destroyed. Attempts to relocate between missions are detected by aerial observation. The Americans have created a counter-battery system that makes sustained artillery support impossible. Without artillery, our remaining defensive positions lose their primary means of disrupting American advances." The artillery suppression demonstrated American military sophistication that Japanese doctrine had categorized as beyond Western capability. The integration of radar technology, aerial reconnaissance, fire direction centers, and responsive fire support represented institutional capability that required years of development and training. Japanese forces had no comparable systems and no doctrinal framework for creating them. The technological gap was widening rather than closing as American innovation continued accelerating. By February 25, a week into the battle, Japanese defensive positions that were supposed to hold for months had been compressed into the northern third of the island. American Marines had suffered terrible casualties, over 4,000 killed and 15,000 wounded, but the assault momentum never slowed. Japanese commanders who had predicted that American casualty aversion would break offensive spirit found themselves confronting Marines who pressed attacks regardless of losses. The American willingness to accept casualties challenged Japanese psychological assessments more fundamentally than tactical innovations challenged defensive doctrine. Japanese military culture taught that spiritual strength and willingness to die represented ultimate warrior virtues that soft Western materialists could never match. Yet American Marines were demonstrating determination that equaled Japanese resolve while combining it with tactical sophistication and material support that Japanese forces could not counter. Private First Class Robert Chin advanced through terrain as squad leader called worse than anything they had encountered at Peleliu. Japanese defenders occupied every cave, every crevice, every fold in the volcanic rock. Progress was measured in yards rather than miles, each yard purchased with blood and explosives and flamethrower fuel. But the advance never stopped. When one squad took casualties, another moved forward. When one approach failed, Marines tried another. The institutional commitment to victory was absolute and apparently inexhaustible. Japanese defenders recognized this determination with respect tinged by incomprehension. "They fight with courage we were told Americans do not possess," observed Corporal Masaru Hayashi from a bunker that had repelled 3 separate assaults. "They accept casualties that would break the spirit of forces we defeated earlier in the war." Either American soldiers have fundamentally changed, or our intelligence never understood their true character. Both possibilities suggest our strategic planning was based on flawed assumptions. The recognition that American military capability had been systematically underestimated spread through Japanese defensive positions as Marines continued methodically reducing the defensive network. Officers who had expressed confidence about American weakness now confronted daily evidence that they had been fighting imaginary enemies while real American forces evolved capabilities that Japanese doctrine insisted were impossible. March brought the final collapse of Japanese defensive hopes as American forces compressed remaining defenders into isolated pockets that lacked communication, coordination, or hope of relief. The defensive network that was supposed to make Iwo Jima impregnable had been systematically dismantled by Marine tactics that evolved faster than Japanese responses could adapt. Every defensive technique that worked at Tarawa or Peleliu had been studied, countered, and neutralized by innovations that Japanese intelligence never detected until they appeared on the battlefield. Commander Yamamoto spent the final weeks in an underground command post that had lost contact with most defensive sectors. Radio communications had been destroyed by American electronic warfare capabilities that Japanese forces did not know existed. Runners attempting to carry messages between positions were killed by Marine patrols that seemed to operate everywhere simultaneously. The situation reports that did reach headquarters described positions fighting in isolation without support or coordination, exactly the situation Japanese defensive doctrine was supposed to prevent. General Kurabayashi's final message to Imperial Headquarters acknowledged the magnitude of Japanese miscalculation. We underestimated American military evolution at every level. Their tactics, technology, logistics, and determination all exceeded our intelligence assessments. Future defensive planning must assume that American forces will continue adapting faster than our doctrine can counter. The enemy we face today is fundamentally different from the enemy we fought in early war battles. The admission came too late to save Iwo Jima but marked the beginning of Japanese recognition that American military culture possessed adaptive capabilities that traditional Japanese military thinking could not match. The emphasis on innovation over tradition, the willingness to abandon failed doctrine for successful alternatives, the institutional commitment to learning from failure, all represented cultural strengths that Japanese military bureaucracy struggled to replicate. March 26 brought official American declaration of victory after 36 days of combat that cost nearly 7,000 Marine lives and 20,000 wounded. Japanese casualties exceeded 20,000 killed from a garrison that had been promised they would hold indefinitely. The mathematics of defensive warfare that Japanese doctrine insisted favored prepared defenders had been overturned by American tactical evolution that made fortifications into tombs rather than strongholds. The survivors who eventually surrendered discovered that American treatment of prisoners reflected the same systematic planning that characterized Marine assault tactics. Wounded received immediate medical care. Prisoners were provided food, water, and shelter. Interrogations focused on intelligence gathering rather than punishment. The humane treatment contradicted Japanese propaganda about American brutality and forced reconsideration of other assumptions about American character and culture. Sergeant Ito, recovering from burns in an American field hospital, experienced cognitive dissonance similar to what prisoners from other battles had reported. They treat wounded enemies with the same care given to their own casualties. The medical attention I am receiving exceeds what Japanese military hospitals provided to our own soldiers. This suggests either remarkable humanity or systematic policy that views prisoner welfare as strategically valuable. Either explanation contradicts what we were taught about American military culture. The broader implications of Iwo Jima extended far beyond the island's 8 square miles of volcanic rock. American possession of Iwo Jima provided emergency landing fields for damaged bombers returning from Japan, ultimately saving thousands of American aircrew lives. The island's capture demonstrated that no Japanese defensive position was impregnable against Marines who had systematically solved the tactical problems of amphibious assault. Most significantly, the battle revealed that American military culture could evolve and adapt faster than Japanese doctrine could respond, suggesting that Japan's strategic position was fundamentally untenable. Japanese military analysts studying the battle identified multiple areas where intelligence assessments had failed catastrophically. Estimates of American tactical rigidity proved completely wrong as Marines demonstrated flexibility that exceeded Japanese squad-level authority. Predictions about American casualty sensitivity were shattered by determination that matched Japanese willingness to die. Assumptions about American logistical limitations collapsed before supply operations that sustained offensive tempo indefinitely. Confidence in Japanese defensive superiority evaporated as fortifications were systematically reduced by weapons and tactics Japanese engineers never anticipated. The recognition that American forces represented a fundamentally different kind of enemy than Japanese doctrine assumed forced painful reconsideration of strategic planning across the Pacific. If heavily fortified islands could be captured in weeks rather than months, what did that suggest about Japan's ability to defend the home islands? If American innovation could neutralize defensive advantages that Japanese engineers spent years creating, how could future defenses be designed to survive assault by enemies who adapted faster than defenses could evolve? These questions haunted Japanese military planning in the war's final months as American forces advanced toward the home islands with momentum that seemed unstoppable. The lessons of Iwo Jima suggested that conventional defensive warfare could not defeat enemies who combined overwhelming material superiority with tactical innovation and strategic determination. Japanese officers who had laughed at American Marines discovered that the last laugh belonged to forces they had fundamentally misunderstood until confronting them on volcanic islands where miscalculation meant death. The transformation of American military capability from the struggling forces at Guadalcanal to the sophisticated assault forces at Iwo Jima represented institutional learning operating at revolutionary speed. Every failure was analyzed. Every success was replicated. Every innovation was tested, refined, and deployed. The cultural commitment to improvement over tradition gave American forces adaptive advantages that Japanese military culture, with its emphasis on spiritual strength over material innovation, could not match. Commander Yamamoto survived the battle and spent his final months contemplating the magnitude of Japanese strategic miscalculation. We believed American material superiority reflected weakness rather than strength. We assumed their technological emphasis demonstrated lack of martial spirit. We convinced ourselves that our willingness to die represented decisive advantage over enemies who valued life. All these assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. American forces combined material abundance with tactical skill and determination that equaled our own. The result was military capability we were intellectually and institutionally unprepared to counter. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.